Voter turnout is historically low during general elections when a federal or statewide office isn't up for grabs. So few people voted in Indiana last year that we set a record for worst turnout in the country. Although it could be mid-November before we get official statewide numbers, we do know only a small number of Hoosiers voted in their local elections. Barbara Brozier reports.
For the first time in more than a decade, Bloomington voters headed to the polls Tuesday to choose a new mayor.
If you don't come out and vote, you don't really have the right to complain about it.
In a town controlled mostly by Democrats, Republican candidate John Turnbull ran on a promise to bring a new perspective to the city. During last month's debate on WTIU, he didn't have any issues with his opponent, but thought diversity was much needed in city government.
My only issue is that there are already the city council's 9-0 Democratic, and I think I would be a very good balancing agent for this town, especially for a town this size.
But when the votes were counted, the race wasn't even close. Democrat John Hamilton took home 77% of the vote, continuing the 4-decades-long streak of a Democrat serving as a mayor in Bloomington.
I'm very proud that we're continuing a tradition of progressive Democrat mayors. All have made this city better.
Although there are some new faces on Bloomington City Council, it's still controlled solely by Democrats, and experts say that likely won't change anytime soon.
Bloomington has been overwhelmingly Democratic for the last 4 decades. So if it's done harm, the harm has already been done. I don't think that there's a lot of evidence that this is anything other than that the Democratic dominance reflects the voters in the Bloomington community.
Officials say the Democratic dominance is likely at least partly to blame for the city's low voter turnout. In Monroe County, only about 12% of eligible voters cast a ballot Tuesday.
Most local communities are not competitive between the parties, and that reduces people's incentive to take the time out to vote.
Turnout was better in other parts of the state that had more competitive races. In Indianapolis, where voters were electing a new mayor, about 23% made it to the polls. Democrat Joe Hogsett took home 62% of the vote, winning over Republican Chuck Brewer. In Terre Haute, just more than 20% of voters cast a ballot, but the race was much closer. Incumbent Republican Duke Bennett will serve another term, but only 300 votes separated him and his challenger, Democrat Mark Byrd.
I felt like I was in the hunt, that I was going to be where I needed to be, but I never thought it'd be that close, where we were going precinct after precinct after precinct.
Bennett has struggled with a budget deficit and mounting criticism over a contract the city signed with Powerdyne, a company that's supposed to turn sludge into fuel. But voters ultimately decided to keep him in office.
You hear some criticisms, of course, but that's part of the political process. And I think really it's just the fact that we have a balanced budget next year is pushing us into perfect direction where we need to go.
Many people are already looking ahead to next year's election. With national offices at stake, election officials say there will no doubt be a lot more traffic at the polls. But there's still a common sentiment among some people that an individual vote doesn't necessarily make a difference. That's a mindset experts say is misguided.
In 2008, Indiana went Democratic in the presidential election. Holy cow, that was totally anticipated. So anybody who stayed home on the ground that their vote didn't count in 2008 did themselves a disservice.
For Indiana News Desk, I'm Barbara Brozier.
State Senator Karen Tallian announced this week she'll introduce a legislative package aimed at making voting easier for Hoosiers in hopes of increasing turnout. The proposal includes keeping polls open longer, allowing people to mail in ballots, and studying the possibility of online voting.